I included this hand because it provides you with a good example of how to use SPR for multi-street planning. I think it's also good to include some hand histories from the shallow tables, not only because shallow tables tend to be a lot softer than 100 big blind tables, but also because they're becoming a lot more popular on almost every site now. So it's important that you know how to play profitably and think of creative ways to turn 40 big blinds into a 3-street game. I didn't have any reads on the opponent in this hand, but for the sake of simplicity, let's assume that he's opening with a typical tight range from under the gun. I decide to call pre-flop with ace-king 10-9 single-suited. And before we go any further, there's something I'd like to point out. Generally, these are the types of hands that are good to 3-bet for value against wide opening ranges, but better to call with against tighter ranges. So given that he opened from under the gun, I like calling a lot better than 3-betting. But if I was in the small blind and he opened from the cutoff, I'd be 3-betting here most of the time. Anyway, the big blind and I both call the open, and both players check to me on a Jack-Jack 3 two-tone board. Let's take a second to think about what our options are, and typically a good way to get your thought process moving in the right direction is to start off by asking the right questions. What is the SPR, and what are the likely ranges of our opponents is a good place to start. The big blind has slightly over a pot-sized bet left, so if he's going any further in the hand, he's just going to ship it in if someone bets. If I bet, and the big blind folds, then the remaining SPR with the pre-flop raiser is 3.2. Given all of this, how should we proceed? Well, the first thing to consider is, what the hell could the pre-flop raiser possibly have? If he's opening a tight range like he's supposed to, he should definitely be c-betting almost his entire range on this board. Most overpairs c-bet these board textures, and most trips bet as well, especially since it's a two-tone board. So it's most likely that he has chosen not to c-bet in fear of running into trips, which means he has missed high cards, or some other type of random hand that missed the board. But we don't have anything either, so how should we proceed? I chose bet 16 here for several reasons. First, the big blind only has 14 big blinds, so like I said before, he's either going to check raise all in or fold no matter how big I decide to bet. Betting close to a third pot gives me a great immediate price on my bluff, which is a good thing because it's not that unlikely for the big blind to wake up with trip jacks, especially since Jack-Jack X boards are the most common boards for players to have trips on, besides Ace-Ace X boards. And in the case where the pre-flop raiser decides to check raise, I get a better price on my bet fold as well. But instead of check raising, he decides to call me instead, leaving an SPR of 1.5 on the turn. The turn doesn't really change anything, and I think there's a lot of players that would slow down and stop bluffing in a spot like this. But I think betting is definitely the better option. I said before that I thought he would either c-bet or check raise trip jacks on the flop, so I'm still not convinced that he's slow playing a monster. Additionally, I bet really small on the flop, and remember that there's a strong correlation with the size of your bet and the calling ranges of your opponents. So given that I only bet third pot, it's not that unlikely he would peel me with, well, basically anything. But we still don't have anything ourselves, so what do we do now? Betting is definitely the better option. If we check, we surrender our chance of winning the pot on the river, and we allow him to realize his equity for free. I chose to bet 23, because again, it gives me a good price on my bluff, and leaves me with close to a pot-sized bet left on the river to make him fold his hand. Betting is also the better option because it allows you to leverage your stack, since he has to be concerned that you're just value towning him with trips or a boat, which makes it unlikely that he's going to bluff you. Plus, if I bomb it and he calls, then I'm left with no money left to bluff on the river, and in the case that he goes all in, I'm going to have to fold even though I'm getting a sick price. By the river, it's pretty obvious by now that he doesn't have trips. The vast majority of players don't have the discipline to flat call small bets on two streets with bare trips on a two-tone board. So now it's just a matter of following through with the triple barrel like we planned. I only bet 47 because at the time, I was trying to be a show-off by making him fold for as cheap of a price as possible. But looking back on it now, I like shipping better, because I think a ship makes him fold almost always, but if I bet small like I did, he might make a crying call with an overpair. Or some other random pair.